A young nurse lost her job after saving the life of a 10-year-old boy when a stray bullet hit him. Next day, she received a shocking invitation from the president. Late that rainy evening, a young nurse named Clara was wrapping up her shift at the city hospital in New York when the emergency room doors suddenly burst open. The air was thick with tension, the sound of hurried footsteps and frantic voices filling the space as paramedics rushed in, carrying a small, limp body on a gurney. A 9-year-old boy, his clothes soaked with blood, was barely conscious. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath a struggle. Gunshot wound to the chest. "No pulse," shouted one of the paramedics as he pushed the gurney into the ER. Clara's heart dropped, her breath catching in her throat. She rushed over, her hands already at the boy's side, her mind running through a list of protocols. The trauma team wasn't in the hospital yet. There had been a delay, and the child's vitals were fading fast. Clara knew that if she didn't act quickly, the boy might not survive. "Get me the trauma surgeon now," she called out, her voice steady despite the rising panic. She grabbed the boy's wrist, checking for a pulse, but there was nothing. His heart had nearly stopped. The weight of the situation was clear. The boy was fighting for his life, and time was running out. She called the hospital management, hoping for clearance to begin an emergency procedure. She knew she was breaking protocol, but the boy's life was slipping away with every passing second. "Clara, hold on," came the voice on the other end, sounding distant and slow. "We're checking with the board." Clara didn't have time for that. The boy's skin was growing cold, his chest barely moving as the seconds ticked by. Without a clear answer from the higher-ups, she had no choice. She looked around the room at the limited equipment available. It wasn't ideal, but she knew enough to handle the procedure. She had been trained for moments like this. A calm decision overtook her panic. She had to save this child. She couldn't stand idly by while a life hung in the balance. She glanced at the door again, still no sign of the trauma team. She swallowed her fear and moved into action, pulling the necessary tools from the sterile trays beside the operating table. "Clara, stop!" One of the nurses, who had just entered the room, cried out in disbelief. "You can't do this without clearance." But Clara's eyes met his with a fierce resolve. She knew the rules. She knew what was expected of her. But in this moment, there was only one rule that mattered: save the child's life. Her hands worked swiftly and methodically. She prepped the boy's chest, intubating him to secure his airway, her focus unwavering. She performed the procedure with the precision of someone who had been trained for this very moment, even though she had never been given permission to carry it out. Minutes felt like hours as Clara fought to keep the boy alive. The small operating room was filled with the frantic sounds of beeping machines and the low hum of the ventilator. Sweat dripped from her brow as she made each cut with steady hands, her heart racing in her chest. But she didn't allow herself to falter. She couldn't. She was his only hope. The procedure was high risk, and Clara knew it. She was performing surgery without the backup of a trauma surgeon, without full access to the resources typically available in such a high-stakes situation. It was the kind of decision that could have ended her career if it didn't work, but Clara couldn't let that possibility cloud her judgment. Minutes passed, but Clara's confidence grew as the boy's vitals began to stabilize. Slowly, the once erratic beeping on the monitor started to find a rhythm. His heart had started to beat again, slowly but steadily. Clara felt a wave of relief rush through her, but she knew it wasn't over yet. She couldn't stop, not until she was sure the boy was out of danger. After what felt like an eternity, Clara looked down at the boy, his breathing steady now. She had done it. She had saved him. The boy was alive, and his chest rose and fell in a more rhythmic, reassuring manner. Clara felt a weight lift off her shoulders, but the job wasn't finished. She completed the procedure as best as she could with the resources at hand, stitching the boy's wounds with careful precision. The trauma team burst through the doors moments later, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Clara stood back, watching as they took over, but she knew the boy's fate had already been sealed. He would survive. But Clara's actions came at a price. The next morning, the hospital administration called her in for a meeting. The atmosphere was cold, the walls of the office seemingly closing in around her as the board members took their seats. Clara's stomach churned with unease. She knew what was coming, but she had no regrets. Not a single one. "Clara," the head of the board said, his voice sharp, "you've broken protocol. You performed surgery without clearance. You've put both the child and the hospital at risk." Clara didn't flinch. That child would have died without that procedure, she said firmly. I did what had to be done. The board members exchanged glances. That's not the issue, the head continued. You violated the hospital's rules, and you'll be held accountable. Clara sat quietly as they went on, outlining her violation and the consequences. She had acted outside of her role as a nurse, without permission, without authorization. And now, despite her efforts to save the child, she was being terminated. Heartbroken, Clara stood up from her seat. She had done the right thing. She had saved a life. But that didn't matter to them. The rules were the rules. Her heart heavy, Clara walked out of the boardroom and out of the hospital for the last time. She hadn't done it for recognition or praise. She hadn't done it for a reward. She had done it because, in that moment, she was the only one who could. She arrived at her small apartment later that evening, exhausted and disheartened. The rain had stopped, but the weight of the day pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. Clara sat by the window, staring out at the city skyline, unsure of what would come next. She had lost her job, but she hadn't lost her conviction. The child's life had been saved, and in the end, that was what mattered. The next morning, as Clara drank her coffee in quiet solitude, there was a knock at her door. Startled, she opened it to find a sharply dressed man holding a sealed envelope. This is for you, he said. Clara looked at the envelope, her mind racing with confusion. She opened it carefully, and her eyes widened as she read the contents. An invitation to meet with the president. The boy she had saved was the son of a visiting diplomat, and his family had been deeply grateful for Clara's actions. Clara's bravery had not gone unnoticed. She took a deep breath, unsure of what to make of the sudden turn of events. She had saved a life. And now, the boy's family and the country were offering her something in return, something far more than she had ever imagined. As she prepared for her meeting with the president, Clara couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her here. Her career had ended in one hospital, but perhaps it was only the beginning of something new, something much bigger than she could have ever expected. Clara had saved a life, and in doing so, she had changed her own forever. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains of Clara's modest apartment, casting a warm glow on the small living room. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a stillness in the air that matched the silence within her. The kind of stillness that followed a storm, the kind that feels like the calm before a second, even bigger storm, one that you can't quite predict. Clara sat at her kitchen table, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring out the window at the city below. Her hands, once steady and confident in the emergency room, trembled slightly now as they wrapped around the porcelain mug. The weight of yesterday's events still hung heavily in her chest, constricting her every breath. The boy, he was alive, yes, but she had paid a high price to save him. She could still hear the voices of the hospital board echoing in her mind. You've broken protocol, Clara. You've put both the child and the hospital at risk. She had acted out of instinct. A nurse's instinct to save a life, even at the cost of her own career. But those words, the accusations, and the cold finality of her termination were a constant replay in her thoughts. She hadn't expected a medal, and she certainly hadn't expected praise. But the sheer finality of losing her job felt like an impossible blow to her spirit. The apartment around her felt almost too quiet, too empty. The gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside were the only reminders that the world hadn't stopped spinning. Yet, for Clara, it had. She had lost more than a job. She had lost a piece of her identity, the very purpose she had held for years. With a long sigh, Clara put her mug down and stood up, her gaze lingering on the small plant by the window, a gift from a friend who had long since moved away. She absent-mindedly ran her fingers over its leaves, its green softness offering a sense of comfort she didn't realize she needed. Her mind wandered back to the boy she had saved. His pale face, the sound of his weak heartbeat, the desperate rush of her hands to save him. Her actions had been rash, some might say reckless, but they had been driven by nothing but the need to act. The boy's family, and the diplomats who had been deeply connected to the case, would never forget the nurse who had put everything on the line. Yet, as the day faded into night, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she might have done it all for nothing. After all, she'd lost her job and had no clear path forward. Her phone buzzed beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, a text from her friend, Maria. Maria, how are you? I know it's been a rough day, but I'm here if you want to talk. Clara smiled weakly, her thumb hovering over the keyboard as she considered replying. Her fingers hovered, but her heart just wasn't in it. Instead, she set the phone down and returned to staring at the window. A few moments passed. The doorbell rang. Clara startled, her heart skipping a beat. Who could it be? She hadn't been expecting anyone. Her first instinct was to ignore it, but something about the suddenness made her stand up. She walked cautiously toward the door, her breath shallow as she peeked through the peephole. A sleek black car was parked outside, the kind of vehicle that seemed out of place in her neighborhood. The man standing near the door was tall, sharply dressed in a dark suit that looked tailor-made. His polished shoes reflected the morning light, and his posture was straight, almost rigid, like someone accustomed to power and authority. He wasn't a delivery man. He wasn't here for any routine visit. Curiosity piqued, Clara slowly opened the door. The man offered a polite, if somewhat formal, smile as he extended an envelope toward her. His voice was calm but clipped, carrying an air of purpose. "Are you Clara Jensen?" he asked, his tone almost expectant. She nodded, her mind racing with questions. "Yes, that's me. What's this?" She hesitated before accepting the envelope, noticing the embossed presidential seal on the front. "Please read it when you're ready," he said, taking a small step back. "Good day, Miss Jensen." Before she could ask him anything else, he turned and strode away, heading toward the black car with a purposeful step, his silhouette soon swallowed by its tinted windows. Clara stood at the doorway for a moment, her hand still holding the envelope. Her pulse quickened as she looked at the heavy paper, the seal catching her eye in a way she couldn't explain. There was something about it that sent a chill of uncertainty down her spine. Was this some sort of mistake? She had no family of influence, no special connections. So why was she receiving an official letter with the president's seal? She stepped back into her apartment, closing the door softly behind her. Her hand shook as she moved to the kitchen table, the letter still clutched tightly in her grasp. She carefully slid her finger under the flap, feeling the slight resistance of the seal as it broke. The anticipation in the air felt palpable. She unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words quickly, but then slowly, her gaze locked in place. The letter was an invitation. A personal invitation to meet with the president. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the words again, disbelief clouding her thoughts. "Dear Clara Jensen, your actions on the night of May 6th have not gone unnoticed. The boy whose life you saved, the son of our esteemed diplomat, is doing well, thanks to your quick thinking and bravery. You acted selflessly in a moment of crisis, and for that, the country is grateful. As a token of our appreciation, I would like to invite you to the presidential palace for a private meeting. Your courage represents the best of our nation. I am personally requesting your presence, and I look forward to discussing how we can further acknowledge your exceptional contributions. Sincerely, President Liam Carter." Clara's heart thudded in her chest as she slowly placed the letter back onto the table. She couldn't believe it. There had to be some mistake. A personal invitation from the president? Her mind reeled. She had acted impulsively, without thought of any reward or recognition. She had only wanted to save the boy's life. Now, she found herself in a world completely unfamiliar, a world that she had never once dreamed of entering. Her fingers trembled as they traced the edges of the letter. The idea of meeting the president was almost too surreal to process. She had no idea what this could mean, but she couldn't deny the sudden flood of emotions rushing through her. Gratitude, confusion, and a lingering sense of awe. The boy she had saved was the son of a visiting diplomat, a connection that had been entirely unknown to Clara until now. Her actions had caused a ripple that had reached much farther than she ever could have imagined. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected anything. All she had done was follow her instinct to save a life, and now the entire nation seemed to be recognizing it. The sound of her phone buzzing interrupted her thoughts. Clara glanced down at the screen. Maria's name flashed, the text message waiting. "Maria? Clara? You okay? I saw something online. Is it true? The news about the president." Clara swallowed, her mouth dry. Her mind swirled as she typed a reply. "Clara, I think I just got invited to the presidential palace." She stared at her phone for a long moment before setting it down. The weight of the letter still pressed on her chest. The reality of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. Clara had been to the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in such a short span of time. She had saved a life, lost her job, and now, inexplicably, she was being called to meet the president of the country. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the world around her fade away. All the tension, the uncertainty, the fear, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that she had done the right thing. She had acted when no one else would. And somehow, that simple, courageous decision had led her here. But what came next? What did this unexpected twist mean for her future? Clara wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. Her life had just changed forever. Clara's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the black car sped along the winding road, carrying her toward the heart of the city. The towering gates of the presidential palace loomed in the distance, their iron bars gleaming under the afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the immaculate grounds. Clara could hardly breathe, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind a whirlpool of confusion and anticipation. She had never expected anything like this. One day, she was a nurse at a small hospital, quietly going about her work, and the next, she was about to step into the world of politics, power, and prestige. It felt surreal. The invitation had been clear enough, but the reality of what lay ahead felt so far beyond her comprehension. As the car approached the entrance, she noticed the grandeur of the palace in full force. Columns of white marble rose high above her, the pristine gardens sprawling out with fountains shimmering in the sunlight. Guards in crisp uniforms stood at attention, their eyes trained forward, as though the entire world outside this gate no longer existed. Everything was meticulously designed to project power, importance, and history, and Clara, in her simple dress, felt small in comparison. The car came to a smooth stop in front of the massive doors, and before she could even gather her thoughts, a uniformed attendant was already opening the door for her. He smiled warmly, his demeanor polite but professional. "Miss Jensen, if you will follow me," he said, his voice calm and collected. With a deep breath, Clara stepped out, the soft thud of her shoes against the stone driveway echoing in the stillness. She glanced up at the palace one last time, the opulence of it all almost overwhelming. Her hands clenched at her sides as she forced herself to remain composed. She was led up the steps, through ornate double doors, and into the heart of the palace. The inside was even more magnificent than she had imagined. Gilded chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and tapestries of royal families and historical events adorned the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, a subtle luxury that whispered of untold wealth and history. Her footsteps reverberated on the marble floor as she was guided through the palace's labyrinthine hallways, past rooms where dignitaries and high-ranking officials might have once gathered. Every corner she turned seemed more grand than the last, each hallway leading to an even more impressive room. The entire palace felt like a world of its own, a world Clara had never expected to enter, let alone be invited to. She swallowed hard, her nerves tight in her throat, but the attendant seemed unfazed by the splendor. He moved with practiced ease, as if he had led countless visitors through these halls before. As they neared a large, ornate door at the end of a hallway, he turned to her with a polite smile. "The president is waiting for you inside. Please, make yourself comfortable." Clara nodded numbly, her heart now thudding so loudly in her ears that she could barely hear the attendant's footsteps as he retreated. She was alone now, standing before the door that would lead her to the president. She took another deep breath, steadying herself. There was no turning back now. With a gentle push, the door creaked open, and Clara stepped into a room that left her breathless. The chamber was spacious, the walls adorned with fine art, and the floor covered in rich rugs. At the far end of the room, a large desk sat against a grand window overlooking the gardens. Behind the desk, the president of the country, Liam Carter, stood waiting. He was tall, his demeanor composed and powerful, yet there was a warmth in his eyes that made Clara feel, just for a moment, like she was no longer in the presence of political royalty, but simply someone who cared deeply about the people around him. "Miss Jensen," President Carter said, his voice calm yet firm, as he stepped forward to greet her. His eyes softened as he saw the surprise in her expression. "Thank you for coming. It is an honor to finally meet you." Clara felt herself freeze for a second before she quickly composed herself. "Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't expect this. I'm not sure why I'm here, honestly. I just did what anyone would have done." President Carter smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "What you did was extraordinary, Miss Jensen. What you did goes beyond what anyone would have done. It was more than just courage, it was integrity. It was compassion. And that is why I wanted to meet with you personally." He motioned to a chair opposite his desk, and Clara sat down, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She could feel her heart racing. The weight of the moment was heavy. This wasn't just a meeting with any politician, it was with the leader of the country. As you know, the boy you saved, President Carter continued, is the son of a diplomat, a family that has deep ties to our country's relationship with others. His life was hanging in the balance that night, and if not for your quick thinking, we might not be having this conversation. Clara glanced down at her hands. She had saved the boy, yes, but she hadn't done it for recognition, not for fame. She had acted out of instinct, out of the desire to help. I didn't do it for any reward, she said quietly, meeting the president's gaze. I did it because he needed help. President Carter nodded slowly, his expression one of understanding. And that is exactly why your actions stand out. You didn't think about the consequences. You didn't think about the rules. You thought only of that child's life. And because of that, you have shown the kind of bravery this country needs. He paused for a moment, letting the words settle in the room. Then, with a shift in tone, he leaned forward slightly. But bravery isn't the only thing that makes you special. It's also your integrity, your willingness to stand up, even when it's not easy. And that is why I want to offer you something, Miss Jensen. Clara felt her stomach tighten, uncertain of what he meant. What do you mean? She asked, her voice a mix of confusion and awe. The president leaned back in his chair, a look of deep thought on his face. You are an exceptional individual, Clara, and we need more people like you in this world. People who care about others, who are willing to risk everything for what is right. He stood then, moving to a nearby cabinet where he retrieved a small wooden box. He opened it carefully, revealing a fine gold pin, an emblem of trust, of authority. I would like to offer you the role of my personal nurse, President Carter said. A position of honor and trust, where you would not only care for me, but also for my family, those closest to me, and anyone in need within our circle. It is a responsibility that few ever get the chance to take on. It's a position of great trust, and it comes with a reward far beyond what you could imagine. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she processed the words. Personal nurse to the president? She had always dreamed of doing more, of advancing in her career, but this was a whole new level. It was beyond anything she could have ever imagined. I don't know what to say, she murmured, feeling both overwhelmed and humbled. I didn't do what I did to get this. I did it because it was the right thing. I know, President Carter replied gently, but sometimes doing the right thing has far-reaching consequences. You saved a life that night, Clara. But now, it's your life that I want to help shape. This is not just a job. It's an opportunity to make a real difference, not just in this palace, but in the world. And I believe you are capable of that. Clara sat silently for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always dreamed of making a difference, but this was beyond her wildest dreams. I'm honored, Clara said softly, her voice thick with emotion. But I also feel unworthy of such a position. I'm just a nurse, Mr. President. I didn't do anything extraordinary. President Carter smiled kindly, his eyes warm and understanding. Sometimes, Clara, the most extraordinary thing we can do is follow our hearts. You did that. You followed your heart when it mattered most. And now, you have the chance to continue making a difference on a much larger scale. The room felt still, as if the weight of this decision hung in the air. Clara took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, but there was a sense of clarity that began to settle over her. She hadn't done this for recognition, but now, with the chance before her, she knew that she could do something even greater. With newfound determination, Clara looked up at the president, her voice steady. I accept your offer. I will serve as your nurse. President Carter's smile widened, and Clara could see the genuine respect in his eyes. I knew you would. Welcome aboard, Clara. You have a bright future ahead of you. As she stood up to leave, her heart was full, not just with gratitude, but with a sense of purpose. Her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. But in that moment, Clara knew that everything she had done, every sacrifice, had led her to this new path. And for the first time in days, Clara felt at peace. Humbled, Clara's fingers trembled slightly as she held the final sip of coffee in her cup. The warmth of the drink was nothing compared to the burning questions swirling in her mind. Her meeting with the president had been surreal, a whirlwind of gratitude and emotion. As she stood up to leave the elegant private chamber, Clara felt a mix of wonder and exhaustion settle over her. She had entered the palace as a nurse, just a nurse. Someone who had acted on impulse to save a life, not thinking of the consequences. Now, as she stood on the precipice of something far bigger than she had ever anticipated, Clara struggled to wrap her mind around it all. A personal nurse to the president of the country? The invitation alone had sent shockwaves through her entire being, and it still felt like a dream. Her shoes clicked softly on the marble floors as she made her way back toward the door, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the room. She was still trying to process everything when the door opened, and an aide stepped inside. Clara barely had time to react before he handed her an envelope, sleek and white, sealed with the same elegant insignia that marked official communications. At first, she froze, her heart skipping a beat. Another letter? Another twist in this already strange journey? With a polite nod, the aide turned to leave without a word, disappearing behind the thick wooden doors. Clara glanced down at the envelope, curiosity gnawing at her. She hesitated, unsure whether she was ready for whatever it contained. Her life had already been appended once today. What more could this envelope hold? With a quiet exhale, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. As she read the contents, her eyes widened. The letter outlined a gift so unimaginable, it took a few moments for Clara to fully grasp the magnitude of what she was reading. Her mind raced, struggling to understand the words. $50 million. An expression of gratitude from the diplomat's family for saving the life of their son. It was a gift that far exceeded anything Clara could have ever expected, let alone asked for. She sat back down, the letter still in her hands, her eyes scanning the lines again and again. $50 million. The numbers blurred on the page, but they were unmistakable. It was a life-changing amount of money, more than Clara had ever earned in her entire career, more than she could even begin to comprehend. But that was just it. Clara never wanted this. She never acted out of the hope for a reward or recognition. When she had rushed into that operating room, making the decision to save the little boy's life, all she had cared about was that life, nothing else mattered. Money, status, even a pat on the back, those things didn't cross her mind. And yet, here she was, holding a document that would deposit a sum larger than she could ever have imagined into her account. The reality of it all made Clara feel as though she were floating, untethered from the ground beneath her. Was this the universe's way of telling her that she was on the right path? Was this the consequence of one seemingly simple decision to act out of compassion? Her heart swelled with an odd mixture of gratitude and unease. She never wanted money in exchange for her actions. It had always been about doing the right thing. It had always been about saving a life, about giving her all to the people who needed her most. To be compensated in this way, to have her compassion recognized so dramatically, it felt surreal. Almost too much. Clara sat there, holding the letter, trying to process the gift. But as her mind reeled, another thought began to form, slow and steady, like a seed planting itself in the fertile soil of her uncertainty. Perhaps this money could change her life, but more importantly, it could help her change others' lives. She could do so much good with it. In the moment, she hadn't acted for reward, but she had never been one to shy away from making a difference. A nurse, at heart, always looking to help, to make things better. And perhaps, just perhaps, this gift could allow her to make the world a little better. But it still didn't feel real. Clara rose from her seat and walked to the large window that overlooked the palace grounds. The manicured gardens were now a blur of green and gold as she stood there, lost in thought. She had never been someone who dreamed of riches or fame. She had worked hard to carve out a humble life for herself, never asking for much. Now, she found herself in a whirlwind of unimaginable changes. She was to be the president's personal nurse, a position of honor and responsibility. And now this massive gift of money. How could one person's life change so drastically in the span of a single day? Her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt immense gratitude. This was a recognition of the life she had given, a reward that honored her selflessness. But on the other hand, the sheer magnitude of it made her uneasy. Would she still be the same person with this kind of wealth? Would people look at her differently? Would the values she held so dearly be altered by the weight of the money, the attention, the new life she would lead? As she stood there, pondering, a soft knock at the door broke her reverie. The aide who had delivered the letter stepped back inside, his demeanor respectful, but with an edge of formality. "Miss Jensen, I trust you've received the documents," he said, his voice professional. "The transfer will be completed as soon as you confirm. We simply wanted to ensure you had the information before you leave." Clara nodded, though she was still in a haze of disbelief. Yes, I've received it. Thank you. The aide gave a polite nod before stepping back toward the door. If there is anything else you need, Miss Jensen, do not hesitate to ask. The president has made it clear that you are welcome here, both as his personal nurse and as a friend. Clara didn't know how to respond. She wasn't sure what it meant to be a friend to the president, but the weight of his words hung in the air. She turned back to the window, the reality of her situation sinking in once again. She could feel the weight of the envelope in her hands, still unopened, still a reminder of the gift that had arrived with such unexpected timing. She had never thought that this would be her life, that she would be standing in the heart of the country's power, holding a gift that could change everything. The sum was vast, unimaginable, but the truth was, she didn't know what to do with it. Was she to accept the reward with grace, as it was offered? Could she continue her work with the same purpose, the same humility, despite the newfound wealth that could open doors she had never even dreamed of? She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The truth was, she didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. It was hers to shape, to decide. This money, this gift, didn't change who she was. She was still the same woman who had rushed into that operating room, still the same woman who had wanted only to save a life. The world had changed around her, but she wouldn't let it change who she was at the core. With quiet determination, Clara tucked the letter into her bag. She wasn't ready to let the money define her. She was still the same woman who had acted from the heart. The future had just been rewritten, but the person she was would remain the same. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest reward of all. The sleek, polished floors of the presidential medical wing gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights. Clara's heels clicked with steady assurance as she walked through the corridor, her every step reflecting the new rhythm of her life. A year had passed since the day that altered everything, and though time had passed, it still felt like the echoes of that moment. The moment she saved a life were always present, guiding her, shaping her. She had come a long way in the last 12 months. From the uncertainty of her new role as the president's personal nurse to now, where she was the head of a specialized medical team that treated the country's most influential figures. Clara had earned the respect of everyone around her. No longer just a nurse in the shadows, she was a leader, someone others admired not for her position or the wealth she had received, but for her unwavering dedication to healing and helping others. Her office, once a humble space at the local hospital, now sat within the walls of the Grand Medical Wing, furnished with the latest technology and high-end equipment. Yet, despite the luxury that surrounded her, Clara never let herself become overwhelmed by it. The prestige of her position was a far cry from the woman she used to be, the woman who worked tirelessly for long hours in hospitals, saving lives without recognition or reward. Clara had grown into her role, but the lessons she had learned during that fateful night, the night she made the decision to save the life of a child at any cost, remained her guiding light. She had always known that the work she did was meaningful, but in the year that followed, she had seen firsthand the ripple effect of a single act of courage. People across the country knew her story. It wasn't just about wealth or fame. It wasn't about the $50 million or the prestigious position she had been given. It was about the courage to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. Walking through the hallways now, Clara passed by her colleagues. Doctors, nurses, and medical staff, all of them offering a nod or a smile of respect as she moved past. She had earned this. Her quiet strength, her steady presence, and her relentless compassion had made her a leader not only in her field but in the hearts of those who worked alongside her. Today, however, Clara had more important matters on her mind than just overseeing the high-stakes surgeries or private medical consultations that were her daily routine. She had made a promise to herself, one that she held dear, and she would never forget her roots. Clara stopped at the door of one of the medical rooms and knocked softly. She knew the boy's mother would be there, waiting with her son, who had been the one to thank her all those months ago. Though the boy was now healthy, the bond between Clara and the family had remained strong. As she entered the room, the boy, now more robust and vibrant than the frail child she had saved, looked up with bright eyes and a wide smile. "Miss Clara," he said with genuine excitement, jumping out of his chair to greet her. Clara's heart warmed as she smiled down at him, crouching to meet him at eye level. "How's my favorite patient doing today?" she asked with a playful grin. The boy's mother stood up from the chair beside him, a soft smile on her face. He's been doing great, Clara. He's almost back to his old self. We couldn't have done it without you. Clara felt a deep sense of fulfillment flood through her. In the whirlwind of her new life, it was these moments that kept her grounded. It was not the wealth or the fame that mattered to her. It was the faces of the people she helped, the lives she had touched in ways words could never fully capture. I'm so glad to hear that, Clara said, her voice tender. She sat down beside the boy, taking his small hand in hers. You've been so strong. You know that? The boy nodded, his cheeks pink with pride. You saved my life, he said earnestly. Clara didn't know how to respond. There were no words that could ever truly express what she felt, what it meant to her to hear that. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about making a difference, no matter how big or small. And for Clara, this was her moment of peace. Amidst the chaos of her new, glittering life, this was the quiet victory that she cherished. As Clara left the room, she made her way to the next stop on her journey. The day had been planned for a while. An opportunity for her to give back to the profession that had given her so much. She arrived at one of the nation's largest nursing schools, where a crowd of eager students awaited her. The auditorium was packed with hopeful young faces, all of them aspiring to be the next generation of caregivers, healers, and leaders. Clara stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding in her chest, not from nerves, but from a deep sense of purpose. She had been invited to speak, and though she had never been one for public speaking, she knew the weight of her words now carried more meaning than ever before. The room quieted as Clara began her speech, her voice steady and calm. I'm not here today to talk about my journey to fame, or the wealth that's come with it. I'm here to tell you about the real work of a nurse, the heart of the profession. It's not about titles, not about recognition, or anything you can measure in dollars and cents. It's about people. It's about having the courage to make decisions in the face of fear, to act when others hesitate. She paused for a moment, allowing her words to settle over the room. I've been where you are. I've been the one who rushed to save a life without thinking of what I'd lose in the process. What I've learned over the years is this. The true cost of doing what's right isn't measured in accolades or the rewards you receive. It's measured in the lives you touch, the people you help, and the difference you make, even when no one is watching. The students were silent as they listened intently, hanging on to every word. Clara's heart swelled as she realized that this was the true reward of her journey, the chance to inspire others, to shape the next generation of healthcare providers who would carry on the legacy of care and compassion she had started. As she concluded her speech, the students erupted into applause, but Clara didn't hear it. She wasn't there for the applause. She was there for the quiet moments, the whispered conversations with students who came up to her afterward, telling her they were inspired by her story. For Clara, that was enough. The rest of her day continued in much the same way, a mix of fulfilling moments with patients, colleagues, and students. As night fell, Clara stood at her office window in the presidential medical wing, gazing out at the city below. She could see the bright lights twinkling, a sea of possibilities in the distance. Her life had changed beyond recognition in the past year, but one thing remained the same, her commitment to the work she loved. Clara knew that the true measure of her success wouldn't come from accolades or the $50 million she had received. It would come from the lives she touched, the people she inspired, and the heart she had poured into everything she did. And for that, Clara was more fulfilled than she had ever been. Thank you for following Clara's incredible journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the story. What did you think of Clara's decision to save the child, the unexpected rewards she received, and how everything came full circle in the end? How did the story resonate with you? And how do you feel about the way Clara's life changed over that year? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you had to rate the story on a scale from 1 to 10, what would you give it? We'd also love to know where you're watching from, so drop your location in the comments. We appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this journey. Looking forward to reading your feedback.